The air in the car felt different that morning. It wasn't just the fresh scent of the pine tree air freshener dangling from the rearview mirror. It was the air of possibility. Clara sat in the passenger seat of their 10-year-old minivan, a vehicle that had faithfully carried them through soccer practices, grocery runs, and family vacations, but was now showing its age with a groan here and a rattle there. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her fingers were tapping a restless, excited rhythm against her worn denim jeans. For 3 months, she had lived and breathed car reviews. She knew the safety ratings of every family SUV on the market, the difference between torque and horsepower, and the pros and cons of leather versus cloth upholstery. This wasn't just a purchase. It was a project, and she was the project manager. Her husband, David, drove with his usual calm focus. He was a man of few words, his presence a steady, quiet force in their busy lives. He knew better than to interrupt when Clara was on a mission. He'd seen the spreadsheet she'd created on their old laptop, all the color-coded printouts taped to the fridge, and the late nights spent scrolling through dealership websites. And she had pointed to a picture of a deep blue SUV, a model that promised both safety and a sense of adventure. He had nodded and said, "Okay, let's go see it on Saturday." And now, Saturday was here as they turned into the sprawling car dealership. A wave of nerves washed over Clara. The lot was a gleaming sea of metal and glass. Cars parked at perfect angles under the bright morning sun. The dealership itself was a massive structure of glass and steel. Looking more like a modern art museum than a place to buy a vehicle, it was intimidating. She glanced down at her own simple clothes, a comfortable sweater she'd owned for years, and sensible walking shoes. She carried her favorite tote bag, the one with the slight fraying on the strap, filled with her research papers and a water bottle. Suddenly, she felt very small. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. David parked the van and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt loud. He looked over at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that gentle way of his. "You're sure?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "You know more about this car than anyone here? You've got this." He didn't add a "don't be nervous" or a "you'll be great." He just stated his confidence in her, and it was exactly what she needed to hear. Taking a deep breath, Clara pushed open her door and stepped out into the sunlight. With David following a few steps behind, a quiet and supportive shadow, the inside of the showroom was even more overwhelming. The air was cool and smelled of new leather, expensive perfume, and something vaguely like money. The floor was so polished she could see the distorted reflection of the high, ceiling-mounted lights in it. Cars were displayed like jewels on pedestals, each one bathed in its own perfect spotlight. Salespeople, dressed in sharp suits and crisp shirts, moved with a sleek, predatory grace, closing in on customers who looked the part. Clara saw a man in a tailored suit shaking hands with a salesman, a woman in high heels running her hand along a sports car's fender. She felt like she had walked into the wrong party, but then she saw it. Towards the back, but still in the main showroom, was the SUV. It was the exact deep blue she had seen online, a color that reminded her of the ocean just before a storm. It was perfect. A renewed sense of purpose pushed through her anxiety. She straightened her shoulders, tightened her grip on the strap of her tote bag, and walked towards it. David didn't rush to her side. He knew this was her show. He strolled over to a nearby coffee station, giving her space but keeping her in his sight. As Clara approached the SUV, a salesman who had been loitering near the entrance detached himself from a group of his colleagues and moved to intercept her. He was handsome in a plastic sort of way, with 2 white teeth and hair that looked styled into place. His name tag read Rick. He didn't smile at her, not really. It was more like a practiced curve of his lips. He gave her a quick, dismissive glance, his eyes flicking from her sensible shoes to her simple tote bag, and then back to her face. The whole scan took less than 2 seconds, but Clara felt it like a physical touch. "Help you?" he asked. His tone was flat, bored. He wasn't asking if he could help her. He was asking her to state her business so he could decide if she was worth his time. Clara forced a smile. Yes, actually. I'm very interested in the Explorer model, she said, her voice polite and clear. She gestured towards the blue SUV. I've done a great deal of research and I was hoping I could take it for a test drive. Rick raised a skeptical eyebrow. He glanced past her, as if looking for a more promising customer. The Explorer, he repeated, the name sounding like a joke on his lips. That's a premium package. V6 engine, all-wheel drive. A big step up from a minivan. He let the last part hang in the air, a subtle jab that landed right where he intended it to. Are you sure you're looking at the right vehicle? We have some excellent pre-owned options that might be more in your price range. Very reliable, great on gas. He gestured vaguely towards a dimly lit corner of the showroom, where the older cars were kept. Clara felt a small spark of indignation. I'm quite sure, thank you, she replied, her voice a little tighter now. I like this one. The new one. I'd like to test drive it, please. Rick let out an almost inaudible sigh. He looked at his watch. Look, ma'am, he began, his tone shifting from bored to openly condescending. We have a process here. These are expensive vehicles. My time is very valuable, and we have to prioritize serious buyers. He leaned in a little, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A lot of people come in on a Saturday just to get a free joyride in a brand new car. It's a nice fantasy for them. I'm sure you understand. The humiliation was hot and sharp. Clara could feel her cheeks begin to flush. She could sense a few people nearby were watching the exchange. She saw a woman looking at her with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. Clara wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She had done everything right. She had researched. She had saved. She was prepared to buy. And this man was treating her like a child, trying to sneak a ride on a carousel. I am a serious buyer, she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. She felt her confidence crumbling. We are prepared to buy today if the car is a good fit. He shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. Why don't you fill out one of our financial questionnaires first? He said, picking up a clipboard from a nearby desk and holding it out to her like it was a used tissue. Once we see where you stand, then we can talk about a test drive. We just can't have you taking a $50,000 vehicle out on a whim. The implication was brutally clear. He didn't believe she had the money. He didn't believe she belonged. He didn't believe she was worth his time. Before Clara could even form a reply, he spotted a sharply dressed couple who had just walked through the door. The man had an expensive-looking watch, and the woman carried a designer purse. Rick's face transformed. The condescending smirk vanished, replaced by a wide, welcoming, toothy smile. He completely turned his back on Clara. I'll be with you in a moment, he said to her over his shoulder, his voice dripping with dismissal. Then he walked briskly toward the new couple, his arm outstretched in greeting. Welcome to Henderson Motors. I'm Rick. What a beautiful watch, sir. Are you folks looking for something special today? Clara stood frozen, the clipboard he had practically shoved at her hanging in the air. She slowly lowered it and placed it back on the desk. A wave of deep, profound embarrassment washed over her, so strong it made her feel sick to her stomach. She had been judged, found wanting, and publicly discarded, all in the space of 3 minutes. The gleaming, hopeful atmosphere of the showroom now felt cold and hostile. All she wanted to do was go home, crawl back into bed, forget this whole humiliating day ever happened. She turned to leave, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She found David standing just a few feet away, where he had been the whole time. He was no longer holding a cup of coffee. His hands were at his sides, clenched into loose fists. The gentle, familiar warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look she had only seen a handful of times in all their years together. It was a look of cold, hard stillness. He wasn't looking at the cars or the other people. He was staring at Rick's back, his gaze intense and unwavering. He had seen it all. Seeing her distress, his expression softened slightly as he met her gaze. It's okay, David, she whispered, her voice trembling. Let's just go. Please. But David didn't move. He just gave her a slow, steady shake of his head and said, his voice low and even and full of a quiet power she had never heard before, just a moment, honey. The word honey hung in the air between them, but it didn't sound like the term of endearment she was used to. It was an anchor, holding her in place. Her first instinct was to pull on his arm, to drag him out of this cold, judgmental building and back to the safety of their old familiar minivan. She wanted to erase the last 10 minutes, to scrub the feeling of the salesman's dismissive glance from her skin. But there was something in David's stance that stopped her. It wasn't anger, not in the way she understood it. It was a quiet, absolute stillness that felt more powerful than any outburst. The gentle, supportive husband who had been content to stand in the background was gone. And in his place was a man who had drawn a line in the polished showroom floor. Clara looked from his face to Rick's back. The salesman was leaning against the hood of a much fancier, sleeker car, laughing at something the man in the expensive suit had said. He was gesturing animatedly, his hands sweeping through the air as if conducting an orchestra of his own importance. He looked completely at ease, completely unaware of the small drama he had just created, completely unconcerned about the woman whose hopes he had just crushed. The sight of him, so smug and self-satisfied, made Clara's jaw tighten. A flicker of something besides embarrassment sparked inside her. It was small, but it was there. A tiny ember of defiance. She looked back at David. He hadn't moved, but his focus was absolute. It was like he was calculating something, plotting a course. She knew that look. She had seen it when he was figuring out a complex construction project at work. When he was staring at a set of blueprints, his mind assembling pieces no one else could see. She suddenly realized he wasn't just standing there. He was strategizing. And for the first time since the confrontation began, she felt a shift in the balance of power. Rick had the flashy suit and the loud voice, but David had the quiet certainty that he was right. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, afraid to break his concentration. David finally tore his eyes away from the salesman. He looked down at her, and the hardness in his gaze melted away just enough for her to see the familiar man she loved underneath. He gently took her hand, his own feeling warm and solid. "He made a mistake, Clara," he said, his voice low and even. "A big one. He didn't just disrespect you. He disrespected the work you did. He disrespected the time you put in. And he disrespected the fact that you are the heart and the brains of this family. He thinks my money is the only thing that matters here. He needs to know that's not true." It wasn't just about buying a car anymore. It was about so much more. It was about being seen. It was about being valued for who she was, not for what she had or what she looked like. She had spent her life taking care of everyone else, organizing the chaotic beauty of their family, and this man, this complete stranger, had dismissed all of that in one arrogant glance. David squeezed her hand. "Let me handle this," he said. "You just stand here and be you." He gave her a small, confident smile, and it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. Then he let go of her hand and started walking. Clara watched, her heart thumping in nervous rhythm against her ribs. As David didn't head for the exit, and he didn't head for Rick, he walked with a steady, unhurried pace towards the front reception desk. It was a large, curved desk made of dark, polished wood, and a young woman with a neat bun and a headset was sitting behind it, typing rapidly. She looked up as David approached, her expression professional and a little weary. "Can I help you?" she asked, the question sounding rehearsed. "I'd like to speak with your general manager, Mr. Henderson," David said. He didn't raise his voice, but there was an authority in his tone that made the young woman sit up a little straighter. "It's regarding one of your salesmen." The receptionist's eyes darted past David, scanning the showroom floor, probably trying to identify the source of the complaint. Her gaze flitted over Clara, who was still standing by the SUV, looking lost. She probably assumed this was just another unhappy customer who wasn't getting the price he wanted. She reached for a notepad. "Of course, sir. If you could just give me your name and the nature of the issue, I can see if Mr. Henderson is available." "That won't be necessary," David said. His voice still calm, but with an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. "Just tell him David is here to see him. He'll know who I am." There was something about the way he said it, his simple confidence. the lack of a Mr. or a last name that made the receptionist pause. She looked at him again, really looked at him this time. He wasn't dressed in a suit, but his clothes were clean and of good quality. He wasn't threatening, but he radiated an undeniable presence. She seemed to sense that this was not a complaint to be filed away and forgotten. This was something different. "All right, sir," she said, her voice a little less rehearsed. "One moment." She clicked a button on her headset and spoke quietly into the microphone. "Mr. Henderson, I have a David out on the showroom floor asking for you. He says you'll know who he is." Pause. "Yes, sir." "The main floor, right?" She looked back up at David. "He'll be right out, sir." "Thank you." He didn't walk away. He just stood there, a quiet, immovable object in the flow of the showroom. It was as if he had claimed this small patch of floor as his own. Clara felt a strange sense of pride watching him. He wasn't making a scene. He wasn't yelling. He was simply waiting. And his quiet waiting was more powerful than any shout could ever be. It only took a minute for the general manager to emerge from his glass-walled office in the corner. Mr. Henderson was a man in his late 50s, with a stressed expression and a suit that looked like it had been put on in a hurry. He bustled out of his office, looking around the showroom with an air of annoyance, as if his important work had been interrupted. "What is it?" "I'm in the middle of something," he started, his voice sharp. Then his eyes landed on David and his entire demeanor changed in an instant. It was a remarkable transformation. The annoyed scowl vanished, replaced first by shock, then by a look of dawning recognition, and finally by a wide, almost panicked smile. The tension seemed to drain out of his shoulders, replaced by a fawning energy. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson exclaimed, his voice booming across the showroom. He practically scurried over, his hand already outstretched. "David, my goodness, what a surprise. I had no idea you were coming in today. I would have rolled out the red carpet, my friend." Clara watched from a distance, her brow furrowed in confusion. Sterling? Who was Mr. Sterling? She saw David's face, and there was no hint of warmth there. He looked at Henderson's outstretched hand, as if it were something unpleasant. He pointed a steady finger in the salesman's direction. "Your salesman, Rick," David said, his voice dangerously quiet, but it carried in the suddenly silent space around them. "He just refused my wife a test drive. He suggested she look at cheaper cars, and he was profoundly disrespectful." Henderson's face went pale. He followed David's gaze, and his eyes widened in horror as he saw who David was pointing at. He looked back at Clara, then at David, and the full weight of the situation seemed to crash down on him. He ran a hand over his balding head, a gesture of pure panic. "Oh, no, 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 no. David, I am so sorry." But David wasn't finished. His voice dropped even lower, but it was laced with a chilling finality. "Clara is the one who does all the research and picks our family's cars. She knows more about that SUV than anyone in this building. I'm just here to sign the check." He finally turned his head and looked directly at the manager. "And after how you just let your man treat the person who decides where our money goes, you might want to rethink your strategy." The entire floor seemed to hold its breath. The salesman, Rick, must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere because he stopped laughing and glanced over. When he saw his general manager looking like he'd just seen a ghost, and saw the look of cold fury on David's face, a flicker of uncertainty finally crossed his own. Henderson didn't waste another second. He shot one more pleading look at David, then turned and strode across the showroom floor, his face a thundercloud of fury. "Rick!" he barked, his voice echoing off the high ceiling, making everyone jump. "My office. Now." The sound of Mr. Henderson's voice cut through the polished air of the showroom like a sudden clap of thunder. "Rick, my office." Now every head turned. The confident, well-dressed couple Rick had been charming froze mid-smile. The other salesmen, who had been leaning against desks or talking into their headsets, stood up straight. The entire ecosystem of the dealership, which moments before had been humming with a quiet commercial energy, came to a screeching halt. All eyes were on Rick. The salesman himself looked like a deer caught in the bright, unforgiving glare of a spotlight. The smug, easygoing mask he wore was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. He looked from his furious boss to the man he had just dismissed, to the woman standing by the SUV, and back again. The pieces were clearly not connecting for him. He opened his mouth, probably to make some excuse or crack a joke, but one look at Henderson's face told him this was not the time. The confident swagger evaporated, replaced by a clumsy, scurrying panic as he followed his boss toward the glass-walled office. He looked like a schoolboy being sent to the principal's office, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fit. Clara stood frozen, her hand still resting on the cool metal of the SUV's door. She felt a strange, detached sensation, as if she were watching a movie play out in front of her. The center of the storm was that little glass room, and she, an unwilling participant, was watching the drama unfold from the outside. David hadn't moved. He remained a silent, solid figure, his posture unchanged, his eyes fixed on the office door. The quiet anger that had emanated from him before was now gone, replaced by a cold, hard focus. He was observing, and his observation felt like a judgment in itself. From their position, they couldn't hear the words being exchanged inside the office, but they didn't need to. The story was told in the language of the body. They could see Mr. Henderson, his face red and his hands flying, his gestures sharp and aggressive. He wasn't just talking. He was laying into Rick, his words like physical blows, even through the soundproof glass. Rick, on the other hand, had shrunk. He stood hunched over, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He would occasionally look up, gesturing feebly, trying to interject. But Henderson would just cut him down with another wave of his hand. At one point, Rick pointed a finger in their general direction. Henderson jabbed his own finger back, practically poking Rick in the chest. It was a brutal, one-sided spectacle. A public execution of a man's career happening in silent display for all the customers to see. The sharply dressed couple, Rick's real clients, slowly backed away from the sports car and began to discreetly make their way toward the exit. They didn't want any part of this. The other salespeople, sensing the dramatic shift in power dynamics, suddenly found themselves very busy with paperwork or with phones that weren't ringing. They were all trying to make themselves invisible, hoping the storm would pass them by. Clara watched them all scurrying away, and she felt a pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but was close. It was a moment of profound, uncomfortable clarity. This was what it was all about. Not about cars, not about money, not about customer service. It was about power and who had it and who could take it away. Inside the office, the lecture seemed to be winding down. Henderson's movements became slower, more deliberate. He pointed to the door, a gesture of dismissal. Rick hesitated for a moment, looking beaten. He then walked out of the office, his face pale and his eyes downcast. He didn't even dare to look in their direction. He just walked, with his shoulders stooped, toward a back room, disappearing like a ghost. He was gone. A few moments later, Mr. Henderson emerged from his office. He took a deep breath, straightening his tie and attempting to compose himself. When he looked out at his showroom, he seemed to be trying to reset the atmosphere, to erase the drama and get back to business as usual. But it was no use. The spell was broken. He knew his most important customer of the day, possibly the whole month, had witnessed a complete and utter failure of his business. He smoothed his suit jacket, plastered a look of grim determination on his face, and began to walk directly towards them. As he approached, Clara braced herself. She expected him to try and charm her the way he had charmed David, to use the same oily, fawning energy. But he surprised her. He stopped a few feet away, and instead of looking at David, he looked directly at her. He took in her simple clothes, her worn tote bag, the look of hurt still lingering in her eyes. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a deep and weary regret. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, his voice low and thick with a genuine-sounding remorse, "I am so sorry. There is no excuse for the behavior you just had to endure. It was unprofessional. It was insulting, and it is not, I assure you. But his eyes kept flicking to David, like a nervous student checking the teacher's reaction. Please accept my most sincere and humble apologies. Clara just looked at him, not saying anything. The words sounded right, but they were just words. She was still processing the whole scene, the public humiliation, the quiet storm her husband had unleashed. David finally moved. He put a reassuring hand on the small of her back, a silent signal of support. He didn't look at Henderson. He just kept his focus on her. It was his way of saying, "You're in charge here. It's your call." Clara felt the warmth of his hand, and it gave her the courage she needed. The embarrassment began to fade, replaced by a quiet, steady strength that was so much more powerful. She looked at the man standing before her. It was for David. It was for the man with the checkbook. And in that moment, she decided that wasn't good enough. Her voice, when it came, was clear and surprisingly calm. "My last name is actually Miller," she said, correcting him gently, but the correction landed with the force of a solid blow. "And the reason we came here is because we believe in treating people with respect." She paused, letting her words sink in. Henderson looked completely thrown off balance. He had been so focused on appeasing Mr. Sterling that he had completely missed the point. "My husband trusts me to make the important decisions for our family," Clara continued, her gaze unwavering. "I handle the finances, I plan our future, and I spent 3 months researching the perfect, safe car for our children. When your salesman looked at me in my tote bag and decided I wasn't worth his time, he wasn't disrespecting just a customer. He was disrespecting a woman, a mother, and the person who decides where our family's money goes." She wasn't shouting. She wasn't crying. She was simply stating the truth, and the simple, human truth of it was more devastating than any angry tirade could ever be. She wasn't a victim in this story. She was the wronged party. And she was laying out the terms for her forgiveness. David's hand on her back felt like a silent applause. He was proud of her. That was all that mattered. Mr. Henderson looked utterly humbled. The scripted apologies, the business speak, all of it had failed him. He was standing before a real person with a real grievance. She was holding him accountable with a quiet dignity that was absolutely humbling. "You are absolutely right, Mrs. Miller," he said, and this time his voice sounded sincere. "Completely and utterly right. The failure was mine, not just his. I failed to train my staff properly. I failed to create a welcoming environment for every single person who walks through that door. There is no excuse." He seemed to realize that words were not enough. He needed to do something. He walked over to the gleaming blue SUV they had been looking at. He reached inside and, with a deliberate motion, pulled the keys from the ignition. He walked back and held them out to Clara, his palm flat and open, a gesture of pure offering. "Please," he said, his voice earnest. "Take it. Take the keys. Take it for the day. Take the whole weekend. No pressure. Take your kids for a drive, put your groceries in the back, see how it fits in your garage. Let us earn back your business. Let me earn back your trust." Clara looked at the keys dangling from his hand. They were simple, unadorned keys, but at that moment they felt like a trophy. They were a symbol of validation, of respect. She had come here today to buy a car, but she was leaving with something much more. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and judged. But in the end, she hadn't needed her husband's money or his influence to win. She had only needed her own voice. She slowly reached out and took the keys from Henderson's hand, her fingers brushing against his. They felt cool and real. A small, genuine smile finally touched her lips. It was a smile of quiet victory, a smile that said, "See, I told you so." As she turned to David, who was looking at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated pride, she knew that the real shock of the day wasn't the power of a wealthy husband. The real shock was the quiet, undeniable power of a simple woman who knew her own worth. The keys felt cool and heavy in Clara's hand, their metal edges pressing into her palm. It was a simple, tangible thing, a piece of cut metal, but it felt like so much more. It was a key, yes, but it was also a key that unlocked something else entirely. A sense of validation, quiet triumph, a moment of being truly seen. The bright showroom light suddenly seemed less harsh, the polished floor less intimidating. The air, which had smelled of judgment and expensive perfume just moments before, seemed to smell of simple, honest possibility. Mr. Henderson stood before them, a portrait of professional regret. His shoulders were still slumped, his expression earnest and open. He wasn't just a manager trying to smooth over a problem. He looked like a man who had received a genuine and humbling lesson in the middle of his own workplace. "There is absolutely no pressure, Mrs. Miller," he repeated, his voice softer now, more personal. "Please, take your time. See how the car feels in your world, not in our showroom. If you have any questions at all, any problems, you call me. Not the service department. You call me directly." Pulled a crisp business card from his jacket pocket and scribbled a number on the back. As he handed it to Clara, David finally stepped forward, not as an intimidator, but as a partner. He took the card from her, looked at it, and then met the manager's gaze. The coldness in David's eyes had thawed, replaced by a calm, watchful neutrality. "We'll see, Henderson," he said. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a dismissal either. It was simply a statement of fact. With that, David guided Clara away from the scene of the confrontation. He didn't take the keys from her. He let her hold them, a silent acknowledgement that this was her victory, her moment. They walked through the showroom, and the atmosphere felt different now. Other salespeople, who had been pointedly ignoring them, now offered small, tentative smiles. They weren't looking at David. They were looking at Clara with a new kind of respect in their eyes. Word traveled fast in a place like this. And the story of the quiet woman who had put the salesman in his place and made. The boss apologized was already weaving its way through the staff. As they approached the exit, a different salesman, a younger man with a kind face, hurried over. He held a clipboard with the necessary forms. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice respectful. "I just need you to sign a quick form for the insurance, a temporary permit for the weekend." He didn't rush them. He didn't try to upsell them on anything. He just explained what was needed with quiet competence. Clara took the pen he offered. She read the short form, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was a simple act, signing her name, but it felt powerful. She was no longer just a potential customer. She was a person in charge. David stood beside her, a protective, steady presence, watching her with a look of quiet admiration that was more valuable to her than any compliment. When she finished, she handed the clipboard back. "Thank you," the young man said, his smile genuine. "You're going to love it. The new model is a dream to drive." They stepped out of the dealership and into the bright afternoon sun. For a moment, they just stood there, blinking against the light. The whole experience inside felt like it had happened in another world. Now they were just a couple in a parking lot, with a brand new SUV waiting for them. Clara walked up to the driver's side door, the keys jingling softly in her hand. She took a deep breath, the air smelling of hot asphalt and cut grass from the landscaped medians. She slid into the driver's seat. The moment she settled in, she knew this was the right place. The seat felt like it had been molded just for her. The steering wheel was cool and smooth under her hands. The dashboard was a clean, simple layout of screens and buttons, not confusing or overwhelming. She could see how the cup holders would be perfectly placed for her travel mug, how the console was just the right height for her to rest her arm on. This wasn't just a car. It was a space that made sense to her. David got in on the passenger side. He didn't say a word. He just buckled his seatbelt and leaned back, looking at her. He was giving her the space to experience this moment for herself. Clara pressed the start button. The engine rumbled to life with a deep, satisfying hum, a sound that was powerful but not aggressive. It was the sound of capability. She put her foot on the brake and shifted the gear selector into drive. The movement was smooth and effortless. She eased the SUV out of the parking spot and drove slowly towards the exit of the lot. She wasn't a race car driver. She was a person getting to know a new partner, testing the feel of it. The steering was responsive but not twitchy. It felt solid, planted, safe. As they drove out onto the main road, the world seemed to open up. The view from the driver's seat was higher than in her old minivan, giving her a new perspective on the traffic and the world around her. It was quiet, too. The noise of the outside world seemed to fade away. The only sounds the low hum of the engine and the soft whir of the tires on the pavement. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a comfortable one, a shared moment of quiet appreciation. Clara found a small smile playing on her lips. The humiliation from the dealership was already starting to feel distant, like a bad dream that was losing its sharp edges. This, right here, the feel of the road under her wheels, the solid presence of her husband beside her. "Yo," she said, breaking the silence, her voice soft. For a minute there, when he said no, I actually believed him. I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe we can't afford this. Maybe I'm being silly. David turned his head to look at her. His eyes were full of a gentle warmth. "He's a fool, Clara," he said, his voice low and steady. "He looked at your sweater and your bag and thought he knew your story. He didn't see the woman who taught our son how to ride a bike, or the one who stayed up all night with our daughter when she had a fever. He didn't see the person who can stretch $1 so it feels like 10, or the one who can organize a family reunion for 30 people without breaking a sweat. He saw a price tag, and that's all he'll ever see." His words washed over her, healing the last of the sting. It was true. She was all those things. Her worth had nothing to do with the car she drove or the clothes she wore. Her worth was in the life she had built, the love she had given, the resilience she had shown. And David saw it. He had always seen it. The fight at the dealership wasn't just about a car. It was about him defending that truth. So what was all that about? "Mr. Sterling?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. David shifted in his seat, looking a little uncomfortable. "My last name is Miller, but my middle name is Sterling, my grandmother's maiden name. A few years ago, when we were buying the truck for the business, Henderson was the salesman. He somehow found out my middle name and has insisted on calling me Mr. Sterling ever since. He thinks it sounds more important, more class. It's always annoyed me, but I never really cared enough to correct him." Today, it was useful. Clara chuckled, a real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from her chest. "So you're not a secret millionaire?" He smiled. "We're comfortable, honey, because you're careful. You're the reason we're comfortable." They drove on, taking the scenic route home, the one that wound along the edge of the lake. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the water. Clara found herself relaxing more and more with every mile. She tested the radio, found a station she liked. She adjusted the mirrors, the air conditioning. She was making it hers. She imagined loading the kids in the back, their backpacks and sports gear tumbling all over the spacious cargo area. She imagined driving to the mountains for a weekend, the car confidently climbing the steep roads. She could see their life, their future, unfolding within this smooth, quiet, safe space. When they pulled into their driveway, the car felt as natural as if it had been parked there for years. She turned off the engine, and the sudden silence felt peaceful, not empty. She sat there for a moment, her hands still on the steering wheel, just breathing it all in. "You were incredible in there," David said, his voice soft. Clara turned to him, her heart full. She thought about the fear and embarrassment she had felt, and then she thought about the quiet, steady courage that had replaced it. "I was just so mad," she confessed. "He made me feel so small." "You're not small," David said, reaching over and taking her hand. He brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a simple, tender gesture that meant the world. "You're the biggest thing in my world." He looked past her, out the windshield at their house, their home. "You were right to be mad. But what you did, you didn't just get mad. You were dignified. You were strong. You didn't let him get away with it, but you didn't sink to his level. That's the most impressive thing I've ever seen." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. All her life she had been the quiet one, the supporter, the background character in her own story. But today she had stepped into the spotlight. She had spoken her truth, and she had been heard. She hadn't needed a fancy suit or a loud voice. She had just needed to be herself. And it turned out, being herself was more than enough. It was everything. The rest of the weekend unfolded with a gentle, unhurried rhythm that felt like a gift. Saturday evening, they didn't talk about the dealership at all. They ordered pizza, and Clara sat on the floor with their kids. A board game spread out between them, the new SUV sitting like a silent blue guardian in the driveway. Every time she glanced out the window and saw it, a small, secret smile touched her lips. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a trophy, a reminder of a day when she had found her own voice and discovered it was stronger than she ever imagined. On Sunday, the car truly became part of the family. They packed it up for a trip to the park, just as they would have any other weekend. But this time, it was different. Clara watched as the kids, a boy of 12 and a girl of 10, tumbled into the back seat, their exclamations of wow. And it's so big in here, filling the air. They immediately discovered the built-in window sunshades, the extra cup holders, and the little storage nooks where they could hide their treasures. Her son claimed the third-row jump seat as his secret headquarters, and her daughter happily arranged her stuffed animals in the window. This was her world, her domain, and she had chosen the perfect vessel for it. David watched her with a quiet, steady pride as she expertly programmed their favorite playlist into the sound system and adjusted the GPS for a route to the park. She drove with a new sense of confidence, her hands easy on the wheel, her posture relaxed. The humiliation from the dealership felt like a distant story that had happened to someone else. The only thing that felt real and present was the solid hum of the engine. The clean, open space around her, and the happy chatter of her family in the back at the park. She expertly parallel parked on a street she would have once avoided. It just feels right, she said. It feels like us. They spent the afternoon like any other family, pushing the swings and watching the kids climb on the monkey bars. But there was a new, easy joy in the air. A lightness. The cloud of her brief, sharp encounter with disrespect had been replaced by the bright sunshine of self-assurance. As they walked back to the car, tired and happy, she caught David watching her again. "What?" she asked, a playful smile on her face. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head slowly. I've always known how strong you are, how you hold everything together, but seeing you in there on Friday, ... that was something else. That was a different kind of strength." Clara thought about it. "I think I was just so surprised by myself," she admitted. "I always thought that if something like that happened, I would just get quiet and walk away. I thought I would be too embarrassed to make a scene." "Didn't make a scene," he corrected gently. "You made a point. There's a big difference." Monday morning came, and with it, the reality of the decision. The car was sitting in their driveway, a temporary guest whose time was up. After David had left for work, and the kids were on the bus, Clara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The business card with Henderson's number on it sitting next to her phone. She thought about the experience. She had been treated poorly, but the response had been extraordinary. Henderson had been sincere. The dealership had, after a terrible start, done everything right to try and fix it. Her first instinct was to just go back, sign the papers, and put the whole thing behind them. But then she thought about the principle of it. She thought about all the other women just like her, might walk into that dealership or another one and be made to feel small. She thought about Rick. She didn't know what had happened to him, and she was surprised to find that she didn't really care. Her anger wasn't about him anymore. It was about the system that allowed him to behave that way, the unspoken rules that judged people by their appearance. She picked up her phone. She didn't call Henderson's cell. She called the main dealership number. "Hello," she said when the receptionist answered. This is Clara Miller. My husband and I were in on Friday and took one of the Explorers for the weekend. I'd like to speak with Mr. Henderson, please. A moment later, he was on the line. Mrs. Miller, I hope I'm not calling too early. Was it everything you hoped it would be? He sounded genuinely anxious, eager for her verdict. It's a wonderful car, Mr. Henderson, she said, and she meant it. It fits our family perfectly. The kids love it. It drives like a dream. A sigh of relief was audible on the other end of the line. That is wonderful to hear, truly. So, when can we expect you back? I've already drawn up the paperwork at a price I think you'll be very happy with. It's the least we can do. That's actually why I'm calling, Clara said, and her heart started to beat a little faster. She was about to do something that felt both risky and incredibly right. We would be happy to buy the car from you, and we will be happy to pay the fair market price for it. No special discount needed. There was a pause on the line. I'm not sure I follow, Henderson said, clearly confused. The price is fair, Clara continued, her voice steady. My issue was never about the money. My issue was about how your people decide who is worthy of their time. So, I'll make you a deal. We will buy this car. We will tell our friends about our positive experience, and I will personally write a letter of recommendation to the owner of your dealership, commending you for how you handled a very difficult situation. Under one condition. What is it? Henderson asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Name it. I want you to use my story, Clara said. I don't want you to use my name, but I want you to use this story as a case study. I want you to make every single one of your salespeople, from the newest hire to the most veteran, sit in a room and hear about how a woman in a simple sweater and a worn-out tote bag was fully prepared to spend $50,000 on your lot that day. I want you to teach them that the person who looks like they can't afford a car might be. I want you to teach them to look at people's character, not their clothes. And I want you to make it very clear that the person who walks in with a checkbook isn't the only one who deserves respect. The person who does the homework deserves it too. She finished speaking and held her breath. It was a bold, audacious thing to ask. She was asking for nothing for herself, but for a change in the culture of a place she had every reason to hate. The silence on the other end of the line was long. So long that Clara began to wonder if he had hung up. Finally he spoke, and his voice was thick with an emotion she couldn't quite place. It sounded like awe. Mrs. Miller, he said, his voice cracking slightly. That is the single most profound piece of feedback I have ever received in my 25 years in this business. That's the kind of thing that makes you a better person, not just a better manager. He paused again. Yes, he said, his voice now ringing with conviction. Yes, absolutely, you have my word. I will make it a mandatory part of our training program. I'll develop it myself, and I will call it the Miller Rule. The rule is simple. You treat every single customer like they are the most important person in the world, because they are. Clara felt a huge sense of relief wash over her. It was done. The bad experience had been transformed into something good. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about making a small corner of the world a little bit fairer. They arranged to meet at the dealership that afternoon to finalize the sale. When they arrived, a new salesman greeted them at the door, a woman with a warm smile and a firm handshake. You must be the Millers, she said. Mr. Henderson told me to take special care of you. It's an honor to meet you. The transaction was smooth and professional. No games, no pressure, just honest business. As Clara signed the final paper, she felt a sense of peace. She had come for a car. She was leaving with so much more. As they drove their new car off the lot, this time for good, David reached over and took her hand. You know, he said, looking at her with that look of pure admiration she was starting to get used to, I'm going to be the guy with the checkbook for a long, long time, but you're the one who decides where it goes. Clara smiled and squeezed his hand. She looked at the road ahead, the sun shining down, the smooth, powerful car carrying them toward their future. The man at the dealership had said no to a simple woman's test drive, and in doing so he had accidentally given her a platform. He had given her the chance to show her husband, and more importantly herself, just how strong she was. The real shock of the story wasn't the husband who had shocked everyone with his wealth. It was the quiet, steady power of a woman who knew her own value and wasn't afraid to ask the world to see it too. And that was a story worth telling.